On December 2, 1993, on a rooftop in the Los Olivos neighborhood of Medellin, Colombia, the search block of the National Police found the body of a 44-year-old man. His name was Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria. 4 years earlier, in 1989, Forbes magazine had included him on its list of the richest men in the world. His estimated fortune, approximately $30 billion. He was the 7th richest man on the planet. But Escobar did not see himself as a drug trafficker. He had been elected as an alternate representative to the chamber in 1982. He presented himself as a social benefactor, political leader, future president of Colombia. And while that public image was being built, the Medellín Cartel, under his leadership, was responsible for approximately 5,000 deaths in less than 10 years. This is the documented story of a man who confused his power with legitimacy, who believed that being feared was the same as being respected, and who maintained until the day of his death the absolute certainty that history would remember him as a leader. Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria was born on December 1, 1949 in Rio Negro, Antioquia, Colombia. He was the third of 7 children in a rural middle-lower class family. His father, Abel de Jesus Escobar Echeverri, worked as a farmer. His mother, Hermilda Gaviria Berrio, was a rural school teacher. The family moved to Medellin when Pablo was approximately 7 years old. According to the academic archives of Liceo Lucrecio Jaramillo, where he attended high school, Pablo was an average student. But there was something his teachers would remember years later. The young Escobar was extraordinarily observant. He identified opportunities where others saw nothing. At 16, according to official Medellin police records, Pablo Escobar had his first contact with illegal activities. He started with something seemingly minor: the falsification of high school diplomas. He sold fake academic documents to young people who had not completed their studies. The business, according to subsequent reports, generated his first $1,000. But the real leap occurred with tombstone theft. Pablo and his cousin Gustavo Gaviria began stealing tombstones from Medellin cemeteries, scraping them to remove the names, and reselling them to poor families as used tombstones. It was a macabre but highly profitable business. Then came smuggling. In the 1970s, according to Colombian customs reports, Escobar began smuggling cigarettes, appliances, American clothing from Panama into Colombia. It was illegal, but not violent. It was in many ways a traditional Colombian business in an economy closed to international trade. And then, Pablo discovered something that would change his life. In 1975, cocaine was not yet the massive problem it would become 10 years later. But 1 kilogram bought in Bolivia or Peru for approximately $1,000 could be sold in Miami for $60,000. The arithmetic was irresistible. Pablo did not invent drug trafficking, but he was one of the first to apply industrial scale to it. He built routes, established laboratories in the Magdalena Medio, organized pilots, mechanics, accountants, structured the business as a corporation with specialized departments. In 1976, Pablo Escobar was arrested for the first time. They found 39 kilograms of cocaine in his truck near Itagüí. The case, according to judicial archives, was transferred to Medellin, and there something disturbing occurred. The 2 judges who handled the case were murdered before they could issue a sentence. The case files disappeared. The case was closed for lack of evidence. Pablo Escobar was never convicted. It was the beginning of a pattern that would repeat dozens of times. By 1978, Escobar was sending between 70 and 80 monthly tons of cocaine to the United States. The fortune he was accumulating was unimaginable for someone of his origin. But Pablo had a characteristic that his contemporaries in drug trafficking did not have. While other drug traffickers lived in hiding, Pablo invested massively in his community. He built soccer fields in poor neighborhoods, donated money to churches, paid for the education of children without resources. In 1979, he bought Hacienda Nápoles, a ranch of approximately 3,000 hectares in the Magdalena Medio. He imported zebras, giraffes, hippopotamuses, elephants from Africa. And then he did something extraordinary. He opened the ranch to the public on weekends for free. Thousands of Colombian families visited Hacienda Nápoles every weekend. They saw African animals they would otherwise never have known. Picnics in the garden, free access to the entire complex. For the children of the region, Pablo Escobar was a mythical figure, a man who gave them a zoo. And that public perception was one of the most important assets Escobar built. Not the money, the narrative, the idea that he was different, that he was a benefactor, that he understood the people. In 1982, Pablo Escobar took the step that would confirm his self-perception. He was elected as an alternate representative to the chamber by the liberal renovation movement. He was 32 years old. He was officially a legislator of the country. His arrival at Congress was celebrated by popular sectors in Medellin. For many people from Antioquia, it was proof that a man from the people could reach power. Pablo attended sessions in formal attire. He spoke about the problems of the poor. He proposed laws on popular housing. But there is something critical that subsequent analysts would document. Pablo did not enter Congress to use the position as cover. He genuinely believed he was going to transform Colombian politics. He genuinely saw himself as a leader who would change the country's history. Cocaine, in his self-perception, was simply the means to reach real political power. And that self-perception was not calculated cynicism. It was genuine conviction. Pablo Escobar genuinely believed that history would remember him as a popular leader, not as a criminal. This conviction would define all his future decisions. But in Congress, something began to break. The Colombian Minister of Justice at the time, Rodrigo Lara Bonilla, began investigating the origin of Pablo Escobar's fortune. In August 1983, during a parliamentary debate, Lara Bonilla publicly denounced that Escobar was a drug trafficker. The denouncement, according to El Tiempo newspaper reports, was a turning point. Pablo Escobar lost his political status. He was expelled from the party. The doors of Colombian politics closed for him. Escobar interpreted this rejection as a personal betrayal against him, not as an institutional response to his criminal activities. His reaction defined the rest of his life. On April 30th, 1984, two motorcycle hitmen murdered Minister Lara Bonilla in Bogota. Pablo Escobar never admitted to ordering the murder, but according to subsequent testimonies of ex-collaborators collected in extradition trials, it was Escobar who gave the order. The murder of the Minister of Justice marked the formal beginning of the war between Pablo Escobar and the Colombian state. By 1985, the government had declared Escobar public enemy number one, and Escobar had declared, in his own words cited by his biographers, "Total war against those who persecute me." The method of war was brutal and systematic. Between 1984 and 1993, the Medellín Cartel was responsible, directly or indirectly, for the murder of approximately 200 judges, more than 1,000 police officers, and 4 presidential candidates. Each murder was designed to send a specific message to the Colombian government. Leave me alone, but there is something disturbing documented by the psychologists who have studied the case. In Escobar's public statements during those years, collected in letters to newspapers and rare interviews, he consistently presented himself as a victim. The Colombian oligarchy was persecuting him. The American government was persecuting him. The press was persecuting him. His crimes in his public narrative were self-defense. In 1989, Escobar made the decision that would define him before history. He ordered the murder of presidential candidate Luis Carlos Galán. Galán had promised to continue the extradition of drug traffickers to the United States if he reached the presidency. On August 18, 1989, during a rally in Soacha, Galan was murdered by gunshots. The murder of Galan profoundly shocked Colombia. It was the formal beginning of what would be known as narco-terrorism, and Escobar began a campaign of massive bombings in Colombian cities. On November 27, 1989, a bomb placed on Avianca, Flight 203, exploded 5 minutes after takeoff from Bogota. The plane fell in Soacha. The 107 people on board died, including 2 American citizens. Pablo Escobar never admitted the order. But subsequent judicial testimonies attributed the attack to the Medellín Cartel. 3 days later, on December 6, 1989, a truck loaded with explosives detonated in front of the Administrative Department of Security building in Bogota. The explosion killed approximately 60 people and left hundreds wounded. The archives attributed the attack to the Medellín Cartel, and while Escobar conducted this war against the Colombian state, he also increased his investments in public image. He built more soccer fields, donated more money, appeared at public events as a benefactor. In his own narrative, according to analysts, he was simultaneously defender-warrior and social benefactor. This duality was not strategic. It was genuine. Pablo Escobar genuinely believed he was fighting a just war against a corrupt oligarchy and simultaneously believed he was a benefactor of the people. The two beliefs did not contradict each other in his mind. In 1990, according to Forbes records, Pablo Escobar was included on the list of the richest men in the world. His estimated fortune, approximately $25 billion. By then, the Medellín Cartel controlled approximately 80% of the world cocaine market. His personal power was almost unimaginable. He had submarines to transport cocaine, his own DC-3 aircraft, personal pilots, a network of approximately 700 trained hitmen, mansions in multiple countries, access to politicians, military, and businessmen throughout Latin America. But the true ascent was not material. It was the consolidation of his self-perception as a historical figure. In the rare interviews he gave, Escobar compared his situation to that of Latin American revolutionaries. He saw himself as a figure of popular resistance against imperialism. He was, in his own narrative, a modern Bolivar. And while he constructed that internal narrative, the documented death count attributable to the Medellín Cartel continued to grow. More judges, more police, more civilians. Each death was a footnote in the grandiose political autobiography that Escobar was writing in his mind. In 1991, Pablo Escobar negotiated something extraordinary with the state. He would voluntarily surrender himself to Colombian justice in exchange for 3 conditions. First, he would not be extradited to the United States. Second, he would be held in a prison he would design and build himself. Third, he could select his own personal security guards. The Colombian government accepted the conditions. It was a surrender that seemed more like a victory negotiation. On June 19, 1991, Pablo Escobar surrendered his new official residence, La Catedral, a prison built specifically for him on a hill in Envigado. La Catedral was not a conventional prison. It had approximately 6 hectares of land. It featured a professional soccer field, jacuzzi, complete gym, personal library, sauna, bar, game room, music suite. The rooms had panoramic views of the Aburrá Valley. The facility was built by workers Escobar personally contracted, and the guards, according to subsequent archives, were men Escobar had selected from his own network. La Catedral was, in practical terms, his private residence with the only restriction of not officially leaving the premises. For Pablo Escobar, it was the coronation of his self-perception. He was officially incarcerated, but lived as king. From La Catedral, Pablo Escobar continued operating the Medellín Cartel. He received visits from drug lords, accountants, lawyers. He gave operational orders, negotiated with international buyers, and according to records, organized the execution of people within the prison itself. In July 1992, Pablo Escobar ordered the execution of 2 cartel partners inside La Catedral. The partners, Gerardo El Kika Moncada and Fernando Galeano, had financial disputes with Escobar. Their bodies, according to subsequent reports, were taken out of the prison by Escobar's own network when the Colombian government discovered what had occurred inside La Catedral. The scandal was massive. President Cesar Gaviria ordered Escobar's transfer to a conventional military prison, but Pablo Escobar would not accept the loss of his privileged residence. He decided to escape. On July 22, 1992, Pablo Escobar and 9 of his collaborators escaped from La Catedral while military troops approached for the transfer. It was a humiliating escape for the Colombian government, and for Pablo Escobar, it was the final confirmation of his personal power over the state. But the escape also marked both the absolute peak and simultaneously the beginning of the end. Because from that moment, according to United States government archives declassified decades later, the State Department dedicated extraordinary resources to the capture or elimination of Pablo Escobar. The DEA, the CIA, the FBI, Colombian Special Forces, all working in coordination. After the escape from La Catedral, the most intense persecution against a single individual in the modern history of Latin America began. The Search Block, a Colombian special force trained by American agencies, was created specifically to locate and capture or eliminate Pablo Escobar. But the most disturbing piece of the events that followed came from outside the official state apparatus. In January 1993, a group called Los Pepes emerged. The acronym stood for Persecuted by Pablo Escobar. It was a self-proclaimed paramilitary group, victims of Escobar, dedicated exclusively to destroying everything he had built. Los Pepes were composed of members of the Cali Cartel, rivals of the Medellin Cartel, betrayed ex-partners of Escobar, paramilitaries of the autodefensas, and, according to declassified testimonies, received strategic information from Colombian and American government agencies. Their method: replicate Escobar's tactics against him. Los Pepes began murdering Escobar's lawyers, cartel accountants, pilots, hitmen, close relatives. Each body was found with a sign that read, "For working with Pablo Escobar." In the first 6 months of 1993, approximately 100 people from Escobar's network were murdered by Los Pepes. But they also destroyed his properties. Hacienda Nápoles was burned. Multiple Escobar mansions were dynamited. His airplanes burned, his car bombs destroyed, his personal zoo devastated. It was the systematic application of Escobar's own methods against him. And while this was happening, the military pressure intensified. Colombian Special Forces helicopters patrolled Medellin daily. American radio direction finding technology was used to triangulate Escobar's phone calls. Each time he made a call, the forces moved closer to his location. Pablo Escobar responded with the only strategy he knew: more violence. In 1993, he was offering payments of approximately $2,000 for each police officer murdered in Medellin. Hundreds of young officers died in the streets of the city. But this time the strategy was not working. Each act of violence further reduced his operational network. The true internal crack occurred when testimonies suggest that Pablo Escobar began to understand that his self-perception no longer held. The families who previously cheered him now closed their doors when he approached. The popular neighborhoods of Medellin, his political base, began to see him not as benefactor, but as a threat to their own lives. In the letters he wrote to his wife, Maria Victoria Henao, during that period, a change is noticed. Escobar, for the first time, expressed something that resembled doubt, not about his crimes, about his place in history. "Why don't people understand?" he wrote in a documented letter. "I always worked for them." It was a question that revealed the definitive fracture between his self-perception and reality. Escobar genuinely could not comprehend that the people had abandoned him. By October 1993, Pablo Escobar lived in increasingly precarious hideouts, safe houses in Medellin neighborhoods, modest rooms. He was isolated from most of his original network, which had been destroyed by Los Pepes or captured by authorities. His wife and children, Maria Victoria, and children Juan Pablo and Manuela, were living under official protection in Bogotá. And here is something important observed by analysts who studied the case. The most frequent phone calls Pablo Escobar made in his last weeks were to his family. His voice on the recordings, according to reports, was soft, loving, almost vulnerable. He talked with his children about everyday details. He told them how much he missed them, but each call brought him closer to his location. American technology could triangulate his phone's position within 100 meters. Each conversation with his children was simultaneously an act of family love and one more step toward his death. On December 1st, 1993, the day of his 44th birthday, Pablo Escobar called his family from a safe house. He spoke with his son Juan Pablo for several minutes. He talked to him about his next move. He told them how much he loved them, and, according to subsequent testimonies, asked him to have faith. That call allowed authorities to triangulate his exact location at a house in the Los Olivos neighborhood of Medellin. The final operation was scheduled for the following day. On December 2nd, 1993, Colombian special forces surrounded the safe house in the Los Olivos neighborhood of Medellin. The operation began at approximately 3 in the afternoon. Pablo Escobar was inside with his personal bodyguard, known as Limon. What occurred next is documented in the archives of the National Army of Colombia. An exchange of gunfire took place. Escobar attempted to escape through the rooftop of the second floor. The exchange lasted approximately 15 minutes. In that exchange, Pablo Escobar was struck by gunfire and died on the rooftop of the house. He was 44 years old. His death occurred one day after his birthday. The official death certificate declared the cause: gunshot wounds received during search block operation. His last documented words were spoken during his last phone call with his son, Juan Pablo, occurring hours before. He told him, "Whatever happens, remember who I am." It was, according to analysts, a final affirmation of the self-perception that had defined his entire life. Pablo Escobar's body was photographed by special forces. The images showed several members of the search block posing next to the body on the rooftop. It was the visible end of an era. But according to subsequent analysts, it was also the beginning of something more complex. His funeral was held the next day in Medellin, and here something extraordinary occurred. Approximately 25,000 people attended the funeral procession. Women cried, children held flowers, men shouted, "Pablo, Pablo, Pablo," in the streets of Medellin. For analysts who have studied the case, this funeral represents the most disturbing paradox of Pablo Escobar's story. The same communities that in his last weeks had closed their doors to him now celebrated his death as a personal loss. The narrative he had constructed for 20 years did not die with him. It survived in popular memory. His wife, Maria Victoria, his son, Juan Pablo, and his daughter, Manuela, sought asylum in multiple countries. Argentina received them. They legally changed their names. His son, Juan Pablo, now known as Sebastian Marroquin, eventually became an architect and writer. In his memoirs published decades later, he offered the most intimate portrait of the father the world had known. Pablo Escobar's fortune, estimated at up to $30 billion, essentially disappeared. Parts were confiscated by the Colombian government. Parts were taken by surviving members of the cartel, and according to subsequent family accounts, much of it simply was never found, buried in places only Pablo knew, and he took those secrets to the grave. But the true legacy of Pablo Escobar was not his money. It was the persistence of his narrative after his death. Hacienda Nápoles, now property of the Colombian state, was converted into a theme park visited by tourists. The African hippopotamuses he imported reproduced wildly and now constitute a population of approximately 200 specimens in the Magdalena Medio, a living ecological problem of his legacy. And in Medellin, generations of young people grew up listening to stories of Pablo as myth. International documentaries, television series, books have transformed Pablo Escobar into a global popular culture figure. The self-perception he constructed, that of the heroic benefactor against the oligarchy, survives in part still. The lesson that Pablo Escobar's case leaves to history has three parts. First, legitimacy is not self-assigned. Pablo Escobar genuinely believed himself to be a legitimate political leader, but political legitimacy depends on the real consent of the governed, not on the ruler's self-perception. No matter how many public works he financed, the deaths he ordered structurally made that legitimacy impossible. Second, sustained duality is psychologically possible, but ethically impossible. Escobar could simultaneously maintain the contradictory beliefs of being a benefactor and ordering massive murders. His mind could contain both truths without recognizing them as contradictory. But ethical reality does not allow that compartmentalization. Third, and most profound, according to historians of organized crime, power that requires constant violence to maintain itself contains its own destruction. Each act of violence Escobar ordered to protect his position reduced the social base that position required. It was an inevitable spiral toward isolation, and from isolation toward the end. Because in the end, the story of Pablo Escobar is not about cocaine or money or violence. It is about something much more universal, the trap of believing that power is the same as legitimacy. The distance between being feared and being respected, ultimately, was all that his self-deception could not bridge. If you choose to witness their stories, subscribe to Rise and Ruin. Next, we follow another empire from glory to dust.